Go. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am Kimberly Wilburn. I am a board member of Plymouth Area Indivisible, who is hosting this meeting, and Greg Gladen is joining me, also a board member. And we have with us Saraswati Singh, who is a candidate for Hennepin County Attorney. And we will be speaking with her very soon. Just for people who are here, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you put a little Q before it with a colon to mark it, that way Greg will be able to curate those questions, and we will ask those towards the end of our time together here. So welcome, Saraswati, if you want to just introduce yourself and give us your stump speech.
Sounds great. Thank you, Doctor. My name is Saraswati Singh, and I'm running for Hennepin County Attorney. My first name is pronounced Saraswati, and my last name is Singh, as in song. And I say this every time I want you to ask, because I want you to vote for me. I'm a prosecutor, and the Hennepin County Attorney is to be the top prosecutor for Minneapolis and the surrounding area. Why am I running? There's so many people that say the right things, but do they actually know how to change it? And there's some issues that our society has been grappling with for many, many years that are prevalent in our criminal justice system. And I've been waiting, and I haven't been seeing the change that we need. My dad, well, I should start with my grandfather. Back in the day, my grandfather ended up here in the US. He was a diplomat, worked at the UN building in New York. And even though he had this very fancy job, they had the white water fountain and the black water fountain. He had to drink at the black water fountain because the color of his skin mattered more than his position, than his value as a person. And frankly, when my grandfather was here, people kept misidentifying him as Black because people didn't even have the self-awareness to think that there were other groups in the world. With my dad, after 9/11, he was coming home from work. He worked the night shift because it paid more and he had kids to take care of. And on his way back from work, he stopped at the store to buy newspapers. He loves newspapers. It's the bane of my mom's existence. Anyway, he went to the store to get newspapers, and this person called the police on him. Officers arrived and they questioned my dad, and they let him go. Why? Because that person said he was a terrorist, but being brown and having facial hair doesn't mean you've done a criminal act. And then there's me. Growing up, I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and I would love the summertime. I still do. And I would play with those toy water guns. I don't know if they still sell them anymore. We bought them at the 99-cent store, and they're small, they're clear green or clear orange, and very clearly toys. And I would squirt at my siblings with them because I liked hearing them squeal, and it was just fun to do in the summertime. One day, when I was about 9 years old, my parents sat me down they told me I wasn't allowed to play with water guns anymore because a little black boy about my age with a toy water gun that was also colorful was shot and killed by police officers in our county. At the time, I thought my parents were being really dramatic. I saw that the commercials on TV, all these little kids with super soaker guns, toy guns, they got to play. That was when I began to realize more that the rules were different for me. And the rules are different for people that are darker than they are for others. My family's experience, it spanned generations. We're still grappling with these issues. And I've wanted to do something about them for so long. And people have told me I should be patient, it's complicated, it's difficult. I've been patient. It is complicated. It is difficult. But we need to do something. It's not an excuse, not a good excuse to just not do much. We have to be intentional if we want to change the lives so the future generations don't have to deal with these types of issues. It's not fair that anyone in our community should have to deal with that. I'm running because I want change. I want it actually implemented because it affects not only me and my family, but my friends, my colleagues, my community. And we all know what's happened here. And I think with George Floyd's murder, more of our community is actually taking these issues seriously, even if they don't necessarily recognize them as being the types of life experiences they have. My campaign priority is racial equity, police accountability, and public safety. With racial equity, I want to be, and I will be intentional, making sure that we hire, so we're representative of all of Hennepin County, people of not only all races and ethnicities, but of all different socioeconomic classes, blue collar folks, working class, people that grew up with food insecurity, people that are LGBTQ, have different abilities, speak multiple languages, are comfortable or grew up with other cultures. That's really important. Why? Because this is Hennepin County. Our victims and our witnesses, that's their life experience. They deserve to have their county attorney office, which serves them to reflect them. With police accountability, I believe in rule of law. It's a very lawyerly thing, but really the concept is very simple. That every person is accountable under the law. No one gets special treatment simply because of their job or their wealth, whatever it may be. A CEO is accountable under the law. An officer is accountable under the law. Your mailman is accountable under the law. I think it's really important for the Hennepin County Attorney to be clear on that and know that no one gets exceptions simply because of their position, and that we will look at the evidence in a case, not simply just your position. And I have more policies under that, but I'll continue on. The other piece is public safety. We've had so many murders here. Domestic assault has gone through the roof. And actually murders stemming from domestic assaults, where they start out as a domestic incident, it's just been unbelievable. And then we haven't even talked about the carjackings. Violent crime is unacceptable. No one should have to deal with that. Everyone deserves to feel safe and be safe. When I'm Hennepin County Attorney, I'm going to move prosecutors from the drug unit. We're still fighting Nixon's war on drugs. And even though we're considered a progressive state, we're still implementing these antiquated policies that frankly aren't working very well. I think addiction issues are getting worse, not better. We have the opioid crisis now. It's just awful. Moving prosecutors over from the drug unit, so we're not focused on criminalizing addiction, but instead moving them over to the violent crime unit, so that those cases where there's victims, or if their victims are passed away, their families, the prosecutors are actually working on these important cases and spending the time with the victims and their families. And I want to tap into something that I think makes Minnesota special. The state legislature, and it's divided, right? One is Republican, one is led by the Democrats at the moment. They passed the first in the nation office for missing and murdered Indigenous people. Hennepin County has struggled even before the pandemic to solve certain types of cases, the murdered and missing women. I want to use our resources to tap into that. I'm a woman of color. This matters to me. And why am I the right person at the right time for this job? The job is to, Hennepin County Attorney is to be the top prosecutor. I'm a prosecutor. I'm actually the only candidate in the race that's actually implemented progressive prosecution practices, specifically with collateral consequences and low-level drug possession cases. I handle murder, sexual assault, domestic assault cases, and everything in between. I think being a good prosecutor is having good judgment. You don't need to throw the book at everyone. Sometimes you need to, but other times you don't. A prosecutor's job is to do justice, and that's what I do, and that's what this role is. I worked at the Minnesota Attorney General's office, working on both civil and criminal cases. The Hennepin County Attorney's office works on civil and criminal cases. I worked for 2 federal judges, both in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I worked at the U.S. Attorney's office on civil rights cases, and I even worked in Hennepin County for a judge where those public defenders and prosecutors from the Hennepin County Attorney's office would appear in front of us. I would write the orders. I would handle the trials. I've even worked at legal aid. I know what it's like to represent a client, but also what it is to be a prosecutor and represent no one other than justice. I've also had leadership experience and continue to have it. I'm on the Council of Asian Pacific Minnesotans. Governor Walz appointed me some years ago, and I was elected to the executive board where I oversee the state agency. I also was president of the American Constitution Society for 4 terms here in Minnesota. And I've managed a government affairs department. I can go on and on. I have the qualifications to do the job. I have the leadership experience to do the job, and I have the life experience to do the job. And I think the next Hennepin County Attorney needs to have all 3 if they want to actually change the criminal justice system into something that we can all trust, that we all can have faith in. My name is Saraswati Singh, and I'm running for Hennepin County Attorney. I'm a progressive prosecutor, a Hindu, and the daughter of Indian immigrants. And I'm going to bring all of those life experiences with me. And not only that, I know I look young. I'm 37. I'm older than I look. At least that's what I'm told. And 37 is the same age that Amy Klobuchar first ran and won for Hennepin County Attorney. When I get elected, I'll be the first woman of color ever in that position. So please join me, endorse me, vote for me, support me. I'd love to have you. Let's make history together. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So you got into this somewhat, but I will give you the opportunity if there's anything else you want to share with us about your background in training, your work as a lawyer, as a prosecutor. Have you done any defense, and any administrative experience you have?
Sure. Yeah, I've represented clients through legal aid. Specifically, I worked in the disability, getting Social Security disability benefits, helping folks go through that. And that's a largely administrative proceeding because it's through the Social Security Administration. At the U.S. Attorney's Office, I worked on civil rights cases, and we advocated on behalf of folks. We worked on veterans issues, so we would have folks that were deployed overseas, and then some landlords would evict the family while one of the family members was deployed. And under federal statute, there's rules against that, and understandably so. And so we would advocate on behalf of those families. So I worked on those types of cases. Also worked on voting rights cases. We had some issues here in Minnesota of things that were in place that prevented access to people that were eligible to vote and who were trying to vote, and they were not able to. And so my job was to bring the power of the US government to go in and say, hey, we're suing you, and we can take this all the way to court and go all the way to the end, or you can fix this, which will be much cheaper. And also it'll be the nice thing to do. Like, this just makes sense. There's something called consent decrees. I'm probably getting too into the weeds, but I've done a lot of different types of work, and I think it's important to get diversity of experience and practice. And it's made me a better attorney, and it's made me a better prosecutor, because I've seen the criminal justice system and also just the legal system from many different angles. And it's part of the reason why I take collateral consequences so seriously, because I know how much it can affect things like benefits that, they matter, especially if you're a single parent and you have kids, and, juggling childcare and a job that even if you work full time, you still don't make enough money to pay rent,
Okay. So how do you define public safety?
Yeah. I think that it means that the community, that's the public, deserves to be safe. And I take it to mean specifically with regards to violent crimes. And most people, they can't afford to hire a lawyer or even know where to start. And I think that's the beauty of the county attorney's office. You advocate on behalf of people that normally wouldn't even know where to start. I told you I handle murder, sexual assault, domestic assault cases. Many of the victims in my cases, they don't come from money. And sometimes the defendants we prosecute, they're wealthy or they're prestigious. But my job is to advocate for the victims, for the public. Why? Because if there's a perpetrator that's hurting people that are vulnerable in the community, It's a threat to everyone, right? They might abuse their authority over and over again. And we need to have a check on people like that so they don't commit crimes, because we all share this planet together. We share this county together. And so I take public safety to mean advocating, making sure we're addressing violent crime and holding people accountable. And I know prison and the workhouse and jail, those are all three different things. Those are some options, and they're more extreme options, but sometimes we need to use them, especially if someone's murdered someone. There's just, or they're shooting at people. There's certain things that are really a threat to the community, and you need to have a timeout. I also think it means advocating. So within the public safety area of my platform, I talk about hate crimes. People that I'm close to and that are actually on my campaign, and actually I'm while on the Council of Asian Pacific Minnesota and some of the other colleagues of mine, they've experienced that. It means advocating for things that maybe it's not in the news all the time, but it's your job as county attorney to advocate for people that are scared to go to the grocery store, who are scared to talk to the police about the fact that someone assaulted them or pushed them and call them the N-word or yellow or other terms that are just, it's inappropriate. To me, that's all part of public safety, holding people accountable and letting people know they can't get away with taking advantage of members of our community.
So you've said that in your current job, you've been responsible for or part of some progressive reforms. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like, what you've done?
Sure. I'll focus in on one in particular, and if you want to hear more after that, I'm happy to. So during the pandemic, this is something that I've really been wanting and pushing for within the office. But I really believe that drug use, addiction is a health issue. It's not a criminal issue. And the way we've been handling things in our lifetimes, it used to not be that way. There was a time in our history that we didn't treat drug cases the way we do now. We've made a choice. And during the pandemic, John Choi issued a policy saying that any person that has submitted to us for charging, where the only crime they've committed is possessing drug 5, so a low-level drug amount of possession, we aren't going to charge them. And for folks that they've already been charged, and that's the only complaint, like that's the only charge in a complaint. So there's no other issues like domestic assault or anything like that. If more than 6 months have passed, there's some exceptions. We have discretion, but for the most part, dismissing them. So I went through my caseload and I identified my drug 5 cases where that was the only charge. I also connected with the defense attorneys in those cases and asked them, for example, in this one case, to set up, write a letter and include me on it that identifies treatment resources for the defendant, submit that to the defendant, and then I dismiss the case. To me, that was what a prosecutor's job is, right? Setting someone up for success and then also not prosecuting them if it's not necessarily going to be the best thing for all of us. And I can tell you during the pandemic, my caseload quadrupled. This has been true throughout prosecution offices. It's either doubled or quadrupled. We've just had so many cases, but also the court shut down, and so cases weren't proceeding for time. And I think it makes sense in terms of efficiency too. How do we want to use our time? Do we want to prosecute these low-level drug cases, or do we want to use attorney time to make sure we're doing a good job on violent crime cases? So that's one thing that one progressive prosecution practice I've done. And I've done a number of other things.
Okay, so over the past few years, we've seen the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department try new things in policing. So can you give us an overview of that and how you think it's gone? Are there things you think the Sheriff's Department could be doing better? And how would you, as county attorney, try alter or improve things?
Yeah. With the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, I think it's been moving in the right direction. There are some other things I'd like to do. Something that I discovered while being a prosecutor actually is, like, many times we'll say the person will have access to treatment and resources while they're in custody, right? Whether in jail or in prison. And many times in the courtroom, those types of things are ordered. But when you actually show up at the jail, and the Hennepin County Jail is run by the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. Many of those programs aren't actually available. They're beginning to add more and more, but I'd like to expand that. I'd like to make that an integral part of what they do, expanding the types of things that are offered and also the frequency. Because sometimes, for example, like in the prison system, you can get mental health services, but you might have to wait 2 months until your next appointment. That's too long. And especially when the folks that we're seeing in the Hennepin County Jail, because frankly, when I worked in Hennepin County, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, they would call us up saying, we have someone that's having a health crisis. Like, we're not equipped to handle this. Can you help? And we would help find a bed that was secure, that we could get that particular inmate to, because the jail wasn't the right place for them and they needed immediate psychiatric and other help. I want to make sure that we offer these services, because we really see defendants that quite a few are mentally ill, quite a few have addiction issues, or both. And when's the best time to address those things? Right after an incident happens. If you start addressing it months from now, it just generally tends to be not as effective. So I want to make sure those resources are there. And I would work as Hennepin County Attorney with the Sheriff's Office to help them implement those and make sure my office is in line so that we're promoting those types of things and also taking them into account. So if someone's taking advantage of these resources that are now set up in the Hennepin County Jail, and we have the Sheriff's Office that documents, whether who's going to what, we can use that as part of our prosecution. So if someone's doing well, we might decide to just say, okay, we'll agree not to send you to prison because you're doing well. Keep doing those sorts of services while you're out of custody. If you mess up, being in custody is obviously always an option, but let's take a chance because you've demonstrated while in the jail that you're willing to take advantage of these resources and you're doing what you need to help yourself, which helps the rest of our community too.
We're seeing a lot of politicians come out with a tough on crime rhetoric, and in response to the increases in certain crimes that we've seen, blaming the Hennepin County policy on bail and Hennepin County sentencing. They're putting those forth as reasons why we're seeing these increases in crime. So what is your response to that?
So since the pandemic, crime has increased throughout the country. It's not specific to Hennepin County. It's not specific to Minneapolis. It's happened throughout the country. And people that were not doing well to begin with, they're struggling even more. I think all of us it's been traumatic. People are dealing with mental health issues. I'm sure you've read the articles. People are dealing with a lot more addiction issues. Their alcohol sales went up during the pandemic. And I know a lot of people don't know this, and it might not be popular, but alcohol tends to be actually biggest, the substance that causes the most incidents, whether it's domestic violence, DWIs, or criminal vehicular homicide where someone's drunk and they kill someone while driving. So we have these issues. And so crime has increased. And we're also seeing increased crime among juveniles. And I can tell you that we've been seeing kids that they haven't been in school in 2 years, and they're showing up in our juvenile system. So crime is increasing everywhere. I know people are scared. I think that's why they're using the tough on crime language. I don't think that's right. Do you know why? Those, the murders, the drive-by shootings, the carjackings, for the most part, it tends to be the same people over and over again. And it's a smaller group of our society. I know when you're scared, there's a reaction to just take a big net and just scoop as many people up and put them in custody. I don't think that's the smart thing to do. I think the smart thing to do is focus on the people that are actually committing those violent crimes. If you scoop up so many people, you're going to have so many cases, and it's just not going to be as effective. So my response to the people that are saying tough on crime is like, if you really want to be tough on crime, invest in education and the school to prison pipeline. If you really want to be tough on crime, invest in mental health care. If you really want to be tough on crime, focus on addiction issues and providing those services to our community. Because that's what we're seeing in our criminal justice system. I rather we address things before we have a crime rather than too late, which is when you see me, the prosecutor. I rather no one be a victim in the first place. And we know these types of things work. There have been so many more studies done in the last 20 years to 50 years. It makes sense to invest there rather than just saying, basically, off with their heads, let's just, throw everyone in jail.
So following up on that, what role does the county attorney have when it comes to advocating for these other, for having enough after school programs, for having drug treatment programs, for having mental health programs available, and how much discretion does the Hennepin County attorney have when it comes to pressing charges?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer each part of your question. First, one of the reasons why I want this job is the Hennepin County Attorney is the top prosecutor, right? So it's like the fire chief to firefighters, right? And so you have a lot of you have the power to decide whether to charge, what to charge, how to proceed in a case, what to ask for sentencing, all those types of things. And I think it's important to have a prosecutor who actually knows, a Hennepin County attorney who actually knows how to do the job, who knows what types of evidence to look at, how to analyze it, the types of testing that we can now do. The technology keeps improving. And who also isn't afraid to charge cases where you need to charge. That's part of your obligation as a top prosecutor. When it comes to advocating for education, things like that, the Hennepin County Attorney is not only the top prosecutor, but it's also partially a political job. So I plan on advocating at the state legislature for mental health and addiction services within the jails and prisons, because there are some people, they can get that treatment while outside, but there's some people, they keep committing crimes. They're not in a place where they will take advantage of those opportunities and keep the community safe. So I want to make sure we're providing those services within in custody places, but also advocating at the state legislature about how investing in these services earlier on at the school level really helps reduce crime, and talking about what that looks like. Because frankly, you may not know this, but so much of what we do in the criminal justice system is provide health services. When we put people on probation, so much of it is you have schizophrenia. You are not addressing it. You may not have even been evaluated for it. This is the first time we had found out because you assaulted someone that assault is not okay. But the core issue is your mental health issue. You know, there's so many things where us attorneys, and the bench will also say this, why didn't anyone do something earlier? These issues were showing up earlier on in this person's life. It didn't need to get this bad. And when people are adults, it's a whole other legal process because sometimes they don't want help. And it's easier to give help to kids, to people that are younger, people who are just beginning to experience those symptoms. So you can advocate at the state legislature, and that's what I plan to do. I have other pieces to my platform, and they're on my website, saraswatisingh.com. But you really like crime prevention to me is a key portion, and I think that's the direction that the Hennepin County Attorney's Office needs to move to reduce the amount of crime in the first place.
Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the relationship of the county attorney with police departments. So the county attorney needs to have a good relationship with the police departments. The police departments are doing the investigations, bringing the cases to you that you decide on, whether or not to prosecute. But also cases against police officers come to the county attorney, and there have been in recent years some mistrust among the public that perhaps the county attorney hasn't fully prosecuted or investigated charges of wrongdoing against police officers because of that collegial relationship. So how do you do both? How do you have a good working relationship with the agencies that you work with, but also effectively prosecute officers that are accused of wrongdoing?
So a prosecutor needs to have a working relationship with the police department. They don't need to have a good relationship. A lot of people incorrectly believe that prosecutors represent officers. We don't. They are witnesses in many of our cases. And so we put them on the stand. We will ask them to investigate further. When we reject a case that they submit to us, we'll let them know they need to do further investigation. And this is the element of the crime that's missing. So if they do more investigation and that evidence exists, send it to us. But if that evidence doesn't exist, we can't charge the case because it's not actually a crime. I work with police officers, and just like any other profession, they're good officers, they're bad officers, and there's plenty in between, and plenty that are burnt out. I think that it's important to hold officers accountable when they commit a crime, and I would do that as Hennepin County Attorney. I would also consider it on a case-by-case basis. So I would work with the Minnesota Attorney General's office. For example, if there's a particular officer that has a particularly close relationship with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and the public wouldn't trust our assessment of the evidence and the charges, I think I'm a collaborative leader. And I think it takes courage as a leader to recognize when someone else might be better in taking lead on a case. I think Mike Freeman did the right thing when he called Keith Ellison up and said, hey, can you help me on this Officer Chauvin case? And that case, a lot of people think it was just handled by the Minnesota Attorney General's office. It wasn't. it was handled by the Minnesota Attorney General's office and the Hennepin County Attorney's office. There were prosecutors from both offices that worked on that case. And I think it worked well in that scenario. I think it's important to be responsive to the needs of each case. And also, one of the things that I would prioritize as Hennepin County Attorney is making sure that we're hiring people that are comfortable with that value. Because there are some old guard prosecutors who see law enforcement officers as someone they represent and are unwilling to charge an officer. So you need good prosecutors who are just willing to look at the evidence, all the evidence and the law, and then make an honest assessment rather than looking at the evidence, not with an open mind, but a defensive position. Because we need to do what's right, you know, and if a crime was committed, it was committed. If it wasn't, we'll explain that too. I
Okay.
believe Mandeep,
Oh, good. Yeah. And we will get to the, we see everybody and we will get to the chat. And I actually was just going to say, I have a few more questions and then I'm going to let Greg ask a question and then we will start addressing some of the questions that have been put in the chat. So Hennepin County is known and known at a state level as a county that's really good at putting Black people in jail. So why is that? And what do you intend to do about that?
Why is that? It's systemic racism and it's prevalent throughout our society. And we've traditionally not talked about it. And I told you I'm going to be the first woman of color ever in that position. We actually went to the law library to make sure that was accurate. I might actually be the first person of color ever in that position, but people weren't open about identifying as part of a different race back in the day. But what does that mean? That means the people that have been in power, in charge of this office, setting policies, they haven't been people of color. And so I think for the most part, people of color have been seen as other. And what happens when you other people, right? You don't treat them the same. And that's what we have. And not only have been really disproportional in terms of people that are Black, but other races as well. Something that I think a lot of people don't know is the biggest disparity in our system here in Minnesota is actually Indigenous folks. They're the most overrepresented in our criminal justice system. And that's part of the reason why I have racial equity as one of my key top 3 in my platform. You need to not only hire from every part of the county and people of all different backgrounds, and also train the people that are already there to start talking about these issues in a real way, but also talking about what that looks like in terms of implementation. And where do we have some of the biggest disparities in the criminal justice system? It's with drugs. And that's why I think moving prosecutors over from the drug unit over the violent crime unit, it does 2 things. 1, it reduces the racial disparity, right? And then 2, it triages so we're using our resources to where the community needs it most. I think it's just practical. It makes sense to me.
Okay, so speaking of violent crime, what do you plan to do about guns and gun violence?
Yeah. We are having a lot of gun violence. And I plan on moving our resources there. And I mentioned that I'm a collaborative leader. I would meet with the mayors throughout Hennepin County. I've already started meeting with folks, the police chiefs, all the stakeholders, and say, okay, things are really bad. People are beginning to talk about Murderapolis like they were back in the day. This is unacceptable, and we can do something about it. And actually, we have the power to do something about it. Let's get together and prioritize. We need to focus on the shootings, on the carjackings. And you talked about the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office earlier and some things that they've been doing well. I appreciate what they did with carjacking cases. You can see from the statistics, we used to have very few of them, and now they're happening all the time. And they're rather dangerous situations where people are showing up with guns rather than just stealing the car, which is bad enough, but showing up with a gun, pointing it at someone, and then stealing the car. It's just, and sometimes they're beating up folks. It's just, I would work with all the different agencies to prioritize. And the thing is, when you work in the system, you get to know who are the people that are doing it over and over again. So while the public may not know, we'll tend to know, yep, this is the person. I have defendants where they have 8 felony cases because the Hennepin County Attorney's Office handles felony cases. Some gross misdemeanor, there's certain sexual misconduct cases that are gross misdemeanor, but most of them are felony level cases. We don't typically do the misdemeanor, trespass, disorderly conduct, those types. We don't typically handle those. We handle the more serious cases. And so I would work with all the stakeholders to focus on that. And I really would move my resources in the office to the violent crime unit. I keep talking about that, but it's because we have some of these cases where I told you have 8 felony cases with 1 defendant. They get released and they commit another crime, and they're released because they're waiting for their trial to happen, but the courts were shut down, so the trials weren't happening. We have to address this. And it's not every defendant that's doing that. It's not every person that's doing that. It's a smaller group of people. And so I would focus on those people that are committing those gun crimes. It just is practical. And I've been attending Moms Demand Action meetings, going to the Capitol, advocating for closing the gun loopholes. Because frankly, we're seeing a lot of murders even from domestic situations where guns are involved. You have to address this. It's really important. And it's important that the leader know what it looks like on the ground right now and is focusing their resources there.
Okay, so I want to get to Greg's question, but it's kind of in the opposite direction from Mandeep's question. So Mandeep, do you want to come off mute and ask your question, or I can summarize what I'm reading here, whichever you prefer. He may have been distracted, so I will just just so basically in the chat, he talks about his window was broken in his car randomly back in November, and that he realizes violent crime and property crime are not the same, but still he didn't even bother reporting it because he didn't think anything would come of it. And he's wondering what we do in the short term and then longer term about this increase in property crime.
Yeah. So I'm handling a lot of property cases right now. I'm working, one of the newer projects I'm working on. It's important to report those to the police and get a police record. I know that the police are stretched thin or just not doing a good job sometimes on property cases. But as prosecutors, what we do is when we get a police report, we'll review it and we'll charge it if we're able to. And then many times in our property cases, what do our victims want? Restitution. So that's what Mandeep was talking about, like getting the value back, right, for the damage that was caused. Courts, us prosecutors will ask the court, and they typically grant it, restitution. So your car window is broken, a victim would submit a restitution affidavit, we would send it to you, a form that tells you, okay, this is how much you're out. This is, here's the receipt. And then we submit it to the judge and the judge will order that. And that's typically how it works. And when I'm Hennepin County Attorney, I want to emphasize those types of things, because what do victims often want? They want, one, the defendant never to do it again, two, the defendant to get help, and three, they often want restitution, right? Just to get the money back that they lost. Because some victims, they can't even afford to fix that broken window. So then they just tape it over with plastic, right? It makes sense that the justice system responds and helps. And we have the victim crime board and there's money there as well. But I really would like, that's one of the things that I'd like to do, making sure that restitution is actually paid back to victims. And that's actually part of the project that I've been working on in Ramsey County, making sure that we do that, and we do that in a way that's more efficient and quickly.
Following up on that, what is done in the case where the person who committed the crime doesn't have the funds for restitution?
Yeah, so that's when that's the case, and that's many times the case, then usually the victim doesn't get anything. Or they might get a little bit of money. So like they'll just get whatever amount the defendant paid. Something that I really want to explore and make happen in Hennepin County is you tap into some other funds that we have available to use that toward restitution. Knowing that many defendants can't actually pay, it just makes sense because, and it's going to be difficult, right? When there's a pot of money, multiple people want it and people start jabbing each other, even though they generally have the same values. And I know how that's like, but I just think it's so important because so many times in so many cases, the defendant has no money. And then the victim also doesn't have any money. And then the victim, it's just, if we can use pots of money, instead of focusing our money to quote, be tough on crime in a way of sending everyone to prison, we use that money to actually make victims whole again. I think that's more effective.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Greg now, and he can ask his question, and then we can start asking questions from the chat.
Right, thanks. This is a special question because it's usually one that I'm not sure how important it is. I think it's important, but it's one that I have found myself asking prosecutors and criminal justice experts and sheriff candidates, and the only time it ever got answered was the last time I asked it, because we set aside a special full 90 seconds for me to spend asking it. Saraswati, you actually mentioned that the Hennepin County prosecutor is partly political. And actually, this is all political at some level, right? Crime, everything, addressing it, it's all political at some level. And when there is a crime wave, you are under pressure to not only address a crime wave as a professional, but to address it a certain way. You have to be tough on crime. You have to put people in prison. You have to show pictures on the news of cops walking people away from crime scenes with their handcuffs on. You've got to show people are been put in jail. You've got to show that the bad people have been punished, or the legislature is going to hear from it. And the legislature is going to start passing laws that force prosecutors to be tougher on crime, and so on. And it doesn't matter what caused the crime. It doesn't matter what the crime is. It's just that people are scared, especially people in the suburbs. We startle very easily out here. The suburban people are going to hear about the carjackings, and man, you just got to fix that. And we don't want that coming out where we live. And there's this huge amount of political pressure that occurs. And it's based on our perception of crime. And our perception of crime comes from watching television. People see this TV show Cops, which mirrors us to cops being mean to criminals and criminals being presumed stupid and bad. We see Law and Order TV shows where not only does justice always get done, it gets done within a couple of days of the entire process. and bad guys are clearly bad and good guys are clearly good. Children are surprised to learn that people who commit crimes are usually good people who committed a crime. And there's lots of good people who committed a crime. You don't even know who they are. In other words, there's not everyone's good or everyone's evil, and we just want to take care of all the bad people. So that pressure is our problem. So I'm gonna show you a graphic I just found. This is the carjacking data for Minneapolis, starting back in April 21. Okay, and here's the shots fired calls over the same period of time. Okay, and both of those reflect something that we know is true, which is, as you said, you professionals know the carjackings are being done by a small number of people doing a lot of the carjackings. Let's catch them, and then we slow down the crime wave. Other crime waves take care of themselves. I was as a crime wave in Boston in the 1980s. 365 murders occurred over a 4-month period in Boston. It was a bell curve, and they were all murders caused by a major gang from Long Island moving into Boston and replacing the existing gangs that were dealing with drugs in a certain part of Boston, and they just killed them all. There was nothing to do to stop it. There was nothing to do to solve that problem. It was going to happen by itself, but everyone freaked out as it was occurring. Laws were passed. Everyone took credit for going away when it went away, but it was something that happened largely on its own. I'm not saying that we should just ignore crime that happens on its own. I'm saying that the public perception of crime is driven to heights of hysteria as crime goes up. And then the public demands that you as a prosecutor do things that you know you shouldn't be doing. And when you don't do them, the legislature makes you do them. How would you, as a prosecutor running this office, which has all this power, how would you help? What would you do to truly, materially, fully, richly, and thoroughly educate the public so that they aren't so utterly bumfuck stupid about this? Because they're driving your political world. They're driving your political world, and they are doing it based upon a completely irrational view of crime. So how would you reach out to the public and help them understand what really has to happen to really, like this graphic is produced by the city. The graphic that tells me I don't have to worry about carjackings anymore. That's over. But I didn't hear it on the news. I didn't hear anybody saying it to me. I didn't hear anybody. I've been tracking the legislature daily since they went to session. No one there said it. So how would you handle that problem?
So I wouldn't call people that term that you used.
Yeah, but I'm a little angry about it right now. Sorry.
Yeah.
Because I get it all the time here in the suburbs. I'm just tired of it.
Sure. So a lot of people are angry and a lot of people are scared. What do they do when they feel that way? They just instinctively react. And I understand that. What am I going to do? I'm going to do what I've already been doing as part of this campaign, which I've been doing very intentionally. I've been going out to the community. I've been doing up to 4 events a day, talking about what's happening, who I am, and what we can do to address the issue. You have to keep doing that over and over again. I will keep showing up in the community because that's what the community needs. They feel scared and they don't know if their political leaders feel the same way, if they're doing anything about it, and what exactly they're doing. And I think you have to meet the community where they're at. You have to go to them, and I will. And yes, I know other political leaders have been going and they're getting yelled at by their constituents who are really scared. I understand that. But their needs are part of my platform too. I'm a prosecutor. My job is to do justice. So when violent crime occurs, I'm listening and I'm doing something about it. I'm doing a lot about it. My last murder trial, I had it in July. It was 3 weeks long. It was a young woman. She was pregnant. She was murdered right in the street by a gun. She has 3 little kids, or had 3 little kids, and an autistic boy. These are real things. I understand why the community is mad. I understand why they're scared. I understand why they want to make sure their leaders are doing something about it, and they should. Do some folks think that that's happening all the time everywhere? They do, even though it's not quite the way that they're thinking it is. But how would they know unless I go out there, their leaders go out there and talk with them and engage with them and get yelled at by them and hear their fear, hear their anger. And it's just so important for us to do so, because on the news, right, there's a certain theme now, anyone who turns it on can tell. But you need to be out with the people and let people know what you're doing. And I'm going to be clear. My priorities are public safety, police accountability, and racial equity. I'm going to focus on violent crime. We have an urgent need to address it and move our resources there, and working with all the leaders, all the stakeholders to make sure that happens. And being strategic about it, not just trying to scoop up everyone, but focusing on the people that are actually committing these violent crimes. I would just say that over and over again and show that. And show that. We're doing so much right now. The courts have opened back up. I think a lot of people also didn't know that the courts were shut down. I kept getting sick after my trials. I'm the highest level trial attorney you can be in my division. So I kept getting called up for all these. They were only really having murder cases and sexual assault cases. So I kept getting called up over and over again. And then I'd get sick after my trials because COVID, right? But just talking to our community that these are the cases, this murder happened, this person was shot, this person was carjacked, we found the perpetrator, we have charged them, these are the things that are happening, we're prioritizing these violent cases, we're doing something about it, and you're seeing action taken. Because plenty of people can say words, and plenty of people can feel things, but to know that action's being taken and that action is being talked about in the community, the leaders are coming directly to you to talk about it, I think that's what's important. And will there be political pressure? Of course. As a prosecutor, there's so much pressures. People don't know that our job is to think about the victim, the defendant, and the community all at the same time. And many times there's a tension between them. But our job is to consider all those perspectives and then do the right thing, which is oftentimes not clear. And there's plenty of political pressure. We'll have people that call high up your supervisor. They want you to, they want the prosecuting attorney to do X, Y, and Z. I'm used to that, but I still have to do my job. And that's what we do. And a lot of people don't see it, but that's why I love being a prosecutor. Because every time I've gotten the political pressure, my bosses have always told me, my mentors and the people that I mentor, you have to do the right thing. This is not just you don't need to do something just so you get a good article in the newspaper from this particular reporter or this particular, no, you have to do the right thing. That is our job.
Thanks. That's a pretty good answer. I just want to add a little bit as a sort of finer detail is I do think that some of this has to do with the culture of how the office communicates and how the police agencies communicate. So, for example, when there's an incident, like a major incident that is actually reported from the scene on the news and the police sheriff or a police chief is there, it always begins with a litany of agency response. So we had this many sheriffs and this many police agencies and whatever responded to this incident, and it's a standard part of the practice of reporting. And I think that I don't see that as just a standard form that makes sense to me. It's a bit of distraction. It's a way of showing strength and power. It's a way of spreading credit, and it has nothing to do with whatever happens. I mean, really, relatively little. In the long term, it does to some extent. I think that we see, frankly, I think a lot of it. You've mentioned, you want to get a good article in the paper. That's, that's not your objective. Your objective is to do the right thing, but the newspaper reporters' objectives are not to do the right thing. To not support you doing the right thing. It's to sell that article. And the article that sells is the one that sensationalizes the crime that's happening now. And you can't sensationalize a reduction in crime rate of a certain crime. So I guess one thing I'm just asking, and I don't need you to follow up on this, is sort of my suggestion is, how do you get the news out that you're working, that it's working when it's working? Because we hear when it's not working. I guarantee you, we all hear it again and again when it's not working. How do you get the news out when it's working? Because the news of stopping and slowing down the carjacking, to me, is a really important and significant story that's happening now. And it's not, I don't see it foregrounded in the news, but it should be.
So I see some people left. I want to make sure that I answer other people's questions, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, Greg, and I can talk to you more offline about them.
Okay.
But I just want to make sure that I'm listening to all the voices that are here.
Okay,
And Doctor.
yeah. So I want to ask a question from Chelsea, and then I want to sort of add my own specifics onto it. So I hope Chelsea is okay with that. But so Chelsea writes, I am curious about a case you've worked on that has been the most challenging in terms of weighing equity and progressive ideals against the evidence. How do you balance that? And then I would like you to talk maybe specifically about, like, we know that the vast majority of women that are in jail for murder or manslaughter are there because they killed their abusers. Could you speak to that? And we know, as you have mentioned, that the war on drugs has been used as a war on people of color. And so we see a disproportionate number of Black and brown people charged with drug offenses. So that's my that's my addition to what Chelsea is asking.
Yeah. So those are three different, very big questions. I think being a progressive prosecutor, there isn't a rule book on that, and people interpret it different ways. And the thing is, I think about them in every case, and every prosecutor has to, with regards to the equities of the case, what's the right thing to do. And being a progressive prosecutor, I've interpreted to mean certain things. And this is something that I've developed just over time and learning from other prosecutors as well. One thing is collateral consequences. Sometimes the difference of one day in a sentence will have huge consequences. The difference between someone being deported or being eligible for certain services, just the difference of one day. And if it's a murder case, there are certain types of cases where there are going to be collateral consequences. And I am comfortable knowing that there will be collateral consequences in those cases, and that's okay, because the crime was so serious. But there's other cases, like nonviolent ones, where the difference of one day, for example, will mean this person will likely be deported. And we have folks that are a single parent with kids. So if that person is deported, the kids will end up, through my office actually, in child proceedings on finding a guardian for them, right? Because the kids are born here, for example. So what is the right thing to do in those cases, right? And there's some prosecutors that won't consider that. But to me, I think it is important to consider it. And we have situations like that time and time again. And I think it's important to think about it. And I have, in certain cases that are nonviolent, I'll say, okay, that difference of one day will be, possible deportation. And I work with other divisions in our unit, in our office. So like the civil division, and learning about like the child proceedings when someone, kids don't no longer have their guardian. Those kids tend to struggle, right? And so I think it makes sense to make those changes. And I do. I'll offer something that's equitable. So, okay, you'll do one day less, but you'll have to do this community service thing. You'll have to go speak to this group, or you'll have to do, I would like you also to do this treatment, or I'd like you to also write a letter of apology, because that's something the victim wants, and that will mean so much more to the victim than that additional day. So those are things that I have done and would continue to do as Hennepin County Attorney. And I think it's an important part of what justice means. You asked about a couple other cases, questions, but could you just?
Sure. So
remind-
one was that women, the majority of women that have been incarcerated for murder or manslaughter are there because they killed their abuser. So we'll start with that. So what are your feelings on that, and how would you approach those cases?
I'm going to give a very lawyerly answer, which is it depends. I'll let you know on murder cases, manslaughter cases, many times, regardless of if both the defendant and the victim are both men or both women, or usually someone will say self-defense, and that the other person abused them. So knowing that, I would look at the evidence in the case, and is there evidence indicating that that is in fact true? And where were the injuries that took place? Was there any video? Those sorts of things. And because I want to do the right thing, right? If the person that, if a person was killed because someone really truly was defending themselves, that's a different scenario than someone intentionally, premeditatedly killing someone and not, where there wasn't that abusive relationship. And I would take that into account, because that's what you do in every case. You have to take into account the circumstances of that particular case and what's fair there, and what the evidence shows too. Yeah.
Okay, and then my other example was that we know that the war on drugs has been a war on people of color, and that there's disproportionate charging of people of color in drug crimes. Mm-hmm. And so what would your response be as county attorney to these cases being brought to you?
I would meet with all the stakeholders, and I would say that I'm exploring no longer charging these low-level drug cases, the drug 5 in particular. I'd like to try that and say, what are your thoughts? What are your concerns? And taking them into account before crafting a policy. But I can tell you that, because I've handled these types of cases, we know that people that identify as white use drugs at a slightly higher rate than people that are Black. And in these studies, many times they don't even consider the rest of us, Asian, Hispanic, Indigenous. But who do you see in the criminal justice system on these drug cases? Overwhelmingly, the defendants that you see are people that are Black or BIPOC. And what does that tell you? It means the people that are actually breaking the law, who are actually using those drugs, aren't the ones that we're seeing in our system. We aren't actually enforcing it evenly. And so either you do it right, or we need to change what we're doing, and I would make changes, because this is just unacceptable. It's been going on for so long, and it isn't fair that people of a particular race get a benefit and other people get a harsher consequence that impacts their housing, education loans, things like that. It doesn't make sense. And in the vast majority of the drug 5 cases, the possession, many times they have no other criminal history. And so why am I going to focus there when I have people that are committing a lot of violent crimes, and we need to focus on that?
All right, so I am going to ask, if he's willing, my a fellow board member, Dr. Milan Sohani, has joined us, and he put a question in the chat. But Milan, if you'd like to come off mute and ask your question.
Sure. Thank you, Kimberly. First of all, Saraswati, I apologize. I came late. I joined late. I was at another meeting to do with childcare, and Congressman Dean Phillips was moderating that one. And I'm on the school board, Wayzata school board, so it was very important that I attend that meeting as well. So I don't know if you know this, but Saraswati is the Hindu goddess of knowledge, music, art, speech, wisdom, and learning. Okay, did you know that?
Of course, that's
Okay.
who I'm named after. My
Right,
grandfather
exactly.
picked the name.
Okay, so Saraswati, for me at least, is goddess of education. So that's what I grew up knowing that, you know, that term as. So which of these traits do you think you associate yourself with, and which one will help you the most should you become the county attorney? Of course, you don't have to agree that you are limited to these traits. If you have something else that will help you the most, we would like to know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for saying my name. You said it beautifully. And also knowing what it means. The one, I don't want to sound egotistical, but I love learning. That's been true throughout my whole life. And that's part of the reason why I've had so many jobs. I've done them, I've learned them, and then I'm like, well, what's next? And that's kind of how I end up being 37 and completing all these jobs and being like, oh, I thought I'd be 50 by the time I did all of this. What do I do now? Though there's many other reasons why I'm running for Hennepin County Attorney. So love of learning, knowledge. I'm knowledgeable about the criminal justice system. I've worked in it for many years. I've seen it from different perspectives, from the judicial perspective, from the prosecution perspective, and representing clients. I understand that view as well. Speech, I appear in court every week, every day sometimes. I do jury trials. I have to think quickly on my feet. I have to adapt easily. I have to speak differently based on the circumstances. So when I'm alone with a victim and a victim advocate there, and they're scared to go out and testify because the perpetrator's in the courtroom, talking differently, being gentle, asking what they need, what I can do to make them comfortable, telling them that there's a deputy there and that they don't need to make eye contact with anyone else when they're talking with me, just with me. And when the defense attorney is asking questions, they can look at the defense attorney. They don't need to look at the defendant. And that I am there because I believe this crime happened and I'm there for them. And all they have to do is be honest and be themselves. If they need a break, let me know. They can ask for water. I'll ask for a break. So I think my knowledge, my love of learning, my knowledge of the criminal justice system, my public speaking abilities, as well as speaking in general in many different contexts. And hopefully I have wisdom too. I think that's sometimes the most important thing of all. You can know all sorts of facts. You can have a really high IQ, but if you don't have wisdom to know when to speak and when not to speak, when to listen, when to take a step back, and when to take a step forward, even though no one else is taking a step forward, that's wise. And that is the most valuable thing of all. And I think I have it.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so I have one final question that I saw in the chat, and then we'll give you or Jesus a chance to put in the chat your website, email, whatever contact information you want so people know where to find you and how to get a hold of you. And I'll check in with Greg and make sure there's no final questions that he saw in the chat or anything. And I think we're close to finishing up. So the question I saw was, can you tell us what your position is on cash bail reform?
Yeah. I'd like to change the system that we currently have. It's going to require a lot of work because under the Minnesota Constitution, defendants have the right to cash bail. I'm sorry, to bail. And so there's a lot of pieces that would have to take place to change the system that we currently have. In the meantime, there's other things that a county attorney's office can do. And some county attorneys have already been doing. So if someone has a nonviolent case and they appear for their court appearances, and we believe those things to be true, we can release them on their own recognizance. So say, just come for the next hearing. These proceedings are still going to occur, but you're going to be out of custody, or conditionally release them. So say, you don't have to pay anything. We're going to release you pending your next court date or until you have your trial or however things proceed, but you're going to have conditions. So you might have to do drug testing in between at random times. You might have to check in with the person supervising you in the community, just staying updated, letting them know where you live. And if you're working, letting them know that you're working, because those things can actually help you in a case to prove that, okay, look, you're a productive member of society, or at least trying. You're staying away from the victim that you attacked. Those are good things. But if you keep showing up at the victim's door, as a prosecutor, you advocate to a judge to take that person to custody because they need to stay away from the victim. And if they keep doing those sorts of things, it can become witness tampering, and we want victims to feel safe to come to court and testify and just share their truth.
Okay, Greg, did you have any other final
I
questions?
think we need one last little question, just a really brief one. We're looking at 5 people. You're all making great cases in your own way about why you should be the attorney. What is the one thing, the most significant thing that separates you out from the others that you want people to go into the voting booth thinking attached to your name?
I'm 37. I'm the youngest candidate in the race, but I actually have some of the most experience. I'm the same age as Amy Klobuchar when she first ran and won for Hennepin County Attorney. This job, when people get it, they tend to stay there for years. Mike Freeman had this job for over 20 years. I have the energy to tackle the big issues, public safety, police accountability, racial equity. I have the energy and the willingness and the time to actually invest in this office, to turn it around into something that we can believe in and people trust again.
All right, thank you. I will point out that Jesus has put some information in the chat, so everyone take a look at that before we leave. And I think we are finished. I will, Saraswati, I will give you the opportunity to, if there's, to close out with whatever you would like to share with us.
Thank you to everyone that's here. And I see Hulda just joined us. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thanks for listening. I am running for Hennepin County Attorney, and I know there's 6 candidates in the race. I'm one of the only prosecutors in the race. I actually know how to do the job. I'm ready to do the job on day 1. I've done both criminal and civil work. I have leadership experience, overseeing a state agency at the Council of Asian Pacific Minnesotans, managing a government affairs department, being president of legal organization right here in town, elected 4 years in a row. I know the work, I know the leadership, and very importantly, I'm a Hindu. I'm the daughter of Indian immigrants. We are one of the top 5 relocation centers in the country for immigrants. We have Afghani refugees coming in. We might have Ukrainian refugees coming in soon too. I have the life experience. My mom calls me the daughter of the community, and I really like that. I think it's accurate. I'm not the most polished person in terms of politics. I have a previous career working in politics. It's different being a candidate. But I don't want to be perfectly polished. I want to be real. Our community is hurting right now. I feel it. And I want real change. So please endorse me. I'm now one of the front runners. We're getting more and more traction. We can do this together. And when I get elected, I'll be the first woman of color ever in the position. That will be historic. It should be historic, but the only way we can make history is if we all get off our couches and vote. Vote to endorse a woman of color, to use that power, and also to vote in the primary, to vote in November. These things are really important, and I'm the right person at the right time for the right job. So please join me. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. And Greg, do we know who's on for next week?
Troutman is on for next week.
All right, so next week we will continue our series, and Simon Troutman will be joining us. So everyone check Facebook for that information, and hope to see you then.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you, Greg, for moderating. I'm very grateful. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And you can stop recording.